Koch, the doctor and researcher whose discoveries helped millions. In the second half of the 19th century, the objective scientific criterion was increasingly consolidated in German medicine. Robert Koch, a young and modest doctor, almost self-taught in his research projects, managed to decipher the cause of tuberculosis, the disease that caused the greatest damage at that time. He also did research on anthrax, cholera, and formulated the postulates that were the basis for future bacteriological and epidemiological research. His legacy is immense, including many of his collaborators made great discoveries of which we still benefit. Robert Koch was born in Clausthal, a humble mining town near Hanover, Germany. His father was a mining engineer and he was the third of 13 brothers. He was a brilliant child, and it is said that he learned to read alone, from the newspaper. In 1862, he went to the University of Göttingen to study medicine. There he had as a teacher Henel, who in 1840 had published that the infections were caused by living parasitic organisms. After graduating, he went to Berlin for a semester to the classes of Rudolf Virchow, who was the great figure of world medicine. Later, he worked at the Hospital de Hamburg and served as a volunteer in the Franco-Prussian War. After the war, he was appointed medical doctor of the district of Wolstein. When he turned 28, his wife gave him a microscope, which was the most important piece of the laboratory he built in his house. There he began to do research, alone and as a self-educator, to study the pathogenic agents. It is said that he dreamed of being an explorer and that this microscope opened a new world for him. At that time, anthrax was an epidemic problem, killing the animals or herds very quickly and without explanation. Koch found in the blood of these animals sticks that were not in the blood of healthy animals. By inoculating healthy mice, he saw that they were sick and dying. But he did something more important. He cultivated the bacteria in a serum that he kept in a rudimentary incubator, with an oil lamp. Thus, he was able to observe the complete life cycle of these bacteria, and when he injected some that corresponded to later generations, he saw the same effect. The mice became ill and died. Those studies took about 6 years. But he had proof that the microbes caused the disease. Wrote to the University of Breslau. He was received by professors Kohn and Kahn, initially unbelievers and then fascinated and surprised. For 3 days and nights he made accelerated demonstrations of the process. He did everything with unparalleled and surprising expertise. Even more so because he was self-taught. He showed a drop of blood from an infected animal, and mentioned that if one of the microbes they saw was divided into 20 minutes, in one day it would have about 20 million germs and the blood would be completely invaded and the animal would die. Koch had introduced them to Bacillus anthracis. It was the first time that the bacterial cause of a disease of animals and man was discovered. Until that moment, it was believed that the variety of germs was due to polymorphism, that is, the transformation of one into another. His work was published in 1876 and Koch became famous immediately. But for the next 4 years, Koch continued to investigate at home, making fixations and photographing bacteria. Koch's work did not go unnoticed by the German authorities. Thus, in 1880 he was appointed director of the bacteriology laboratory of the Imperial Department of Hygiene in Berlin. In this way, he was able to devote himself completely to research, especially tuberculosis and cholera. From then until 1892, all his genius was deployed. One day he saw microscopic blue-colored sticks with a slight curvature. He tracked them until they were convinced they were in all the tuberculosis patients. In March 1882, he announced the isolation and cultivation of the tuberculosis bacillus, which was the cause of 1 of every 7 deaths and the first reason of death by infection in children in Europe. Koch's work consisted in isolating the microorganism that causes this disease and making it grow in a pure culture. With the pure culture, it could induce the disease in laboratory animals, isolating again the germ of the sick animals to verify their identity, comparing it with the original germ. Probably as important as their work in tuberculosis are the so-called Koch postulates that establish the conditions for an organism to be considered the cause of a disease. First, the agent must be found in each case of illness and not in healthy ones. Second, it should not be found in cases with another disease. Third, it must be isolated and kept in a pure culture. Fourth, when inoculated, it must produce the same disease. And finally, it must be isolated again from the inoculated animal. Most of the bacteria that affect humans conform to these postulates, with exceptions such as Mycobacterium leprae, which does not comply with the third of the statements. On March 24, 1882, Koch had his presentation in Berlin, where the most illustrious doctors and scientists of Germany met to listen to Koch. Many consider that this was one of the most important conferences of medicine. It is said that it was a simple and perfect presentation, but above all innovative and inspiring. Among the many present was Paul Ehrlich, pioneer of modern immunology and Nobel Prize winner 1908, who mentioned that night was for him the most important experience of his scientific life. The most illustrious in the audience was the revered Rudolf Virchow, who with a simple gesture could ruin any new idea and who had already made fun of Koch and his pathogenic bacilli long ago. After the presentation of Koch, who without great inflections, with almost trembling voice and with an admirable modesty had exposed the simple history of the discovery of the microbe that killed entire populations, a debate was expected. But after this exhibition, there was only a great silence. Everyone turned to the great Virchow. He simply got up, put on his hat and left the auditorium. It had nothing to say. The whole world was revolutionized. Scientists from all over the world traveled to Berlin to learn from him. The modest Koch only replied, "This discovery, after all, does not matter much." In 1890 he announced the discovery of tuberculin, a protein preparation of Mycobacterium, which initially led to controversy because it was thought to be a remedy for tuberculosis. At least, a good option for diagnosis was developed. In 1885, he was appointed professor of the University of Berlin and, in 1891, honorary professor and director of the Prussian Institute of Infectious Diseases, named since 1912. Robert Koch Institute, position which he resigned in 1904. His successor was his longtime assistant, Georg Gafke. He received many honorary awards, distinctions and doctorates, and in 1905 he was honored with a Nobel Prize in Physiology and Medicine. In 1883 he was sent to Egypt and India as leader of the German Cholera Commission. He described the Vibrio and formulated the basis of the methods for its control, which are still used today. In 1896, he traveled to South Africa to study bovine fever, managing to limit the outbreak of the disease. Then he traveled to India and Africa to study the problems of malaria and its control with quinine, making publications in 1898. In 1901, he postulated that the bacillus that causes tuberculosis, both human and bovine, is not the same, that created controversy. Today, we know that Koch was right. In 1906, after receiving the Nobel Prize, he traveled to Central Africa to help solve the epidemic of trypanosomiasis, or sleeping sickness, that was decimating the local population. The great merit of Koch was to show that microbes cause certain diseases and have developed a method to prove it, which is used today with slight variations. Until then, medicine had had a lot of quackery to deal with infectious diseases. From Koch, medicine had great elements to fight against these diseases. Besides that, it was an example of persistence, work and simplicity, which made it loved and admired by hundreds or thousands of students and doctors from all over the world. He spent many years, days and nights, in his laboratory. But surely his curiosity and his explorer spirit enjoyed it there as well as in the expeditions that he subsequently made to the distant places of Egypt, India and Africa. He died in 1910, with the certainty that in the 20th century, with well-prepared and intelligent people, he would defeat tuberculosis. I dreamed that there would no longer be misery or wars. He believed that this would be the basis for a better world.